Alchemy of Tattooing, Wisdoms of Ancestor Tattoo, where we explore and revive the ancient understandings and methods of tattooing for transformation, creation, and shifting into a higher vibration through processes so effective that it seems like magic. Or is it indeed the true definition of magic? The Alchemy of Tattooing. Okay, so this episode we've got my friend Tu with us. He is going to share some of his insights into tattooing and moko, and just maybe introduce yourself a little bit first and we'll go
cool.
from there.
Kia ora everybody, Turumakina Duley is my name. Originally come from a little place called Whakatane in the Bay of Plenty, North Island of New Zealand. Have been practicing the traditional art form of Ta Moko for 26 years now. First 6 years of that I was backyard scratcher, I guess you would say, with homemade machines, and as you do as a Maori. And this is way back in the days when the Renaissance was sort of just kicking off again. And then I was picked up by a tohunga whakairo who had turned from carving to tattooing. His name was Mark Kopua. He's from Tolaga Bay, Gisborne side of the country, and he took me under his wing and has been a mentor to me on many things Maori since that time. So yeah, I've been practicing the art form of tattoo, Maori tattoo, for 26 years. Yeah.
Awesome. We kind of all started out like that, back then.
Yeah.
Just scratching.
One of the bros just turned up with a homemade machine and said, "Bro, can you tattoo me?"
Yeah. So, that's interesting to bring up as well, because you were taught by a carver. So, the knowledge and the patterns and the stories and everything behind that all relates to the same.
Yes.
With moko.
Yes. So the origins of Ta Moko and the origins of carving come from different realms in terms of what we've been handed down with the knowledge of, but they're totally interrelated art forms. They draw on the same patterns. They draw on the same, what we call pūrākau, I guess, stories of creation stories, all that kind of stuff. They draw on all of that same knowledge. And those art forms were a way of handing down those stories to the next generation. So they became kind of synonymous. And if I was to do it again, I'd probably go and learn carving first and then skip over to tattooing later on, because you'd get just because the carving traditions were maintained throughout the colonial period, whereas the tattooing traditions were almost died. We had to revive it.
So maybe we were just talking before, maybe start with the origins of
tattooing.
Of tattooing, Maori tattooing.
Yeah, so the origins of tattooing for us goes back to an ancestor we know as Mataora, and this comes from the kahununu body of knowledge called the law of the whare. And each tribe had their own, whare, each tribe had their own esoteric school of knowledge, and even sometimes each family had their own esoteric school of knowledge. So the information varies from tribe to tribe, sub-tribe to sub-tribe. But Mataora is generally known story these days. And it's going way back in time. He resided in Aotearoa at a time when humans were still able to traverse through to the spirit world, through a long journey. It took him a long time to get to where he had to go to enter down into what we call Rarohenga, where his wife came from. So his wife had visited with a group of her people to Aotearoa at one stage, what we would call tūrehu, or kind of like fairy people, I guess. And after a jealousy, I guess, between Mataora and his wife, he actually beat her up. He hit her, domestic violence. So she fled home. And then after a while, he regretted what he did, and he decided to go and try and win her back. So he had to start his migration, and he would, like, we're talking about canoes over the ocean, from island to island. The story goes that he would have to go to one island, and when he got to that island, those people would tell him where to go to the next island, and just go on like this and this until he got to, I would imagine it's somewhere around India.
Okay, yes.
Something like that, perhaps.
Yes.
Where he came to the temple where it led down, what they call Taheke was the entrance down into Rarohenga. And it was a massive passageway that led down into the earth. And so he made his way down there, and he came across the people of Rarohenga, or the spirit world. And actually it was his wife's father who was the tohunga Ta Moko, one of the tohunga Ta Moko of that area. And he came across them, and he was actually tattooing somebody. So he sat down with them and started conversing. He started actually saying to them that their form of tattooing was kind of, wasn't the real thing. So they started having this debate about what was the real thing. And at that stage, markings on the surface of the planet, were in Aotearoa at least, were just drawn on, and we call it kiritui. That's where the term kiritui comes from.
Okay, yeah.
So they got into some debate about this, and then eventually, they figured out who he was, and he figured out who they were, and he told them why he was there. Came back to ask for forgiveness for his wife and to take her back. But so watching through the process of these guys tattooing themselves, they were chiseling the ink into their faces. So the people of Rarohenga were kind of laughing at him. They say, right, yours is just going to wash off. Ours is there forever. Yeah. So he was like, oh, I'll take up this challenge. Can you do me? So he got done. And actually they taught him how to do it. But in that process, he had to confront, obviously the father and the family about what he had done. And they said to him, there's a famous saying that comes out of the story, it is whaia na mahi o Rarohenga. Basically is, tattooing for us now has to do with following the ways of Rarohenga. And the ways of Rarohenga is not a violent pathway, it's a pathway of peace, harmony, aroha, love. And so he had to go through this transformation process in order to be able to bring the art form back to Aotearoa. And that did it. He did. He lived there for quite a while, months, maybe possibly years, until the time was right for them to make their way back up and come back home. And he brought the art form with him. We're at this place called Rarohenga. Rarohenga is where the Atua, Reo Moko, resides as well. So we're talking about somewhere near the core of the earth, or probably the core of the earth. And Reo Moko is also is the Atua, or the deity, for a lack of a better word, of tattooing for Maori. He's also the Atua, or the deity of volcanic activity, volcanoes, earthquakes, all that kind of stuff, all that that stuff that goes on with the earth. And for me, when I first started hearing the story, I was like, what's the correlation between volcanic activity and tattooing? But the one thing that's unique about Maori tattooing, especially with the facial stuff, is that we would scarify it. It was an indelible scar left engrooved into the skin, and not just scarred, but tattooed on top of that. So it was a tattooed scar. And so when Reo Moko gets active, he gets angry because of all the stuff that was happening with his brothers and sisters and all the other Atua at the time. When that happens, volcanic activity happened and earthquakes happened, and he would leave scars in the earth, scarifications in the mother in the Great Mother, and we would consider those to be her moko, her tattoos. So that's the correlation. So for us, the origin of tattooing goes back to the spirit world through this ancestor Mataora, and that's the term that we use for someone who wears a full facial tattoo is called a Mataora. One of the terms, anyway. So that's tattooing. Carving, the origins of carving go back to another different ancestor called Ritualistic, whose son took a sacred fishing hook and went out fishing one day. He stole it, took it out, caught a bunch of fish without, giving the right incantations and karakia to Ta Moko, who's the ocean. He didn't go through the right rituals and all that kind of stuff. He just went out, started fishing, took all the fish home. Ta Moko got a bit pissed off at this and said, "Right, boy, come here." So he took him, took this fella, took the hook, put him down into his whare, which was a cave at the bottom of the ocean somewhere, and a carved type of whare. So to me, that's talking about a buried city or something like that, maybe a sunken city perhaps.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was placed as the top carving on top of this whare. Eventually his father said, was going around to all the people and said, "Have you seen my son?" And they said, they told him the story that he'd gone fishing and took the hook, and Ta Moko had taken him and put him into his whare, so he had to come up with a plan to go and save him. So he went down, he made his way down to the bottom of the ocean. I have no idea how he did that. It's kind of similar to heading down to the spirit world, I guess. And found him down there. Long story short, the carvings on this whare that Ta Moko, where he resided, were able to speak to him. He was actually able to communicate with them. And yeah, long story short, he managed to save his son from the top of the whare and brought the art form of carving back up with him. The patterns and the information and the stories that go along with it actually come from under the ocean. So both of those are cut short stories, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. That the carvings were taught. He was able to hear them.
Yeah.
Like there's communication happening. Yeah. From the design to the person, or that there's technology involved. Yeah. So. In saying that, like, do you think that the patterns and whether it's on carvings or in tattooing or moko, have either like they have an energy, they emit an energy or a vibration, or are they in resonance with something? Are they in resonance with what they represent? Is there a connection to that sort of thing?
I definitely think that's the case. Even when we're looking at, like for instance, the ancestral houses that we had back in Aotearoa, the wharenui, whare tupuna, which was usually a depiction of an actual ancestor. But the way that the whare is designed and built is actually a process of channeling energy, because usually the whare would face the rising sun, right? Now, it's not always the case, but generally that was the rule. So that the rays of the sun would come through onto the apex of the house, come through the apex of the house, through the core 5/5 patterns that are painted on the house, and disseminate down to each ancestor that was symbolically carved around the walls, right? So it was a way of channeling the Maori that came from the sun. Yeah. And then you would sleep underneath that, your ancestor that you related to in the whare. So when you're doing things like healing or moko, you always situate yourself in the whare so that you're, underneath the tahu, which is the main spine, the main manawa of the whare. And the manawa is just that. It's all about channeling energy and frequency. And so all the patterns that you see in carvings like this derive from nature in some form or other, and they usually have a proverbial sayings attached to them. So, for instance, the highs, these high patterns, are got to do with the laceration of the earth, the valleys in the earth, and all that kind of stuff. So it links back to what we were talking about with Moko creating valleys and mountains in the earth, the scarification and the heat that's generated, the hurt, the pain that's generated on the earth scarification is related to mourning, all of that kind of stuff. Or patterns like unonahi, who have obvious ties to the ocean. So all of those patterns that we use symbolically, they're quite, what's the word? What's the word when something's not really obvious?
Inconspicuous? Or?
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, so all these patterns are designed to connect the story that's being conveyed through the carving to the actual element where it came from. So unonahi, fish scales, is designed to connect the information to, or the wearer to the ocean or the lakes or the rivers, because it has to do with fish and oceans and stuff like that. So the intention of those designs carry that frequency, and it just carries that connection to the element where it originates from.
Yeah.
And so when you're trying to portray somebody's story, and people come to get tattooed for all sorts of different reasons, for moko. So it's kind of like an artist, a musician has a repertoire of songs, a moko artist has a repertoire of patterns, and you would choose the appropriate pattern to match the story that they want to tell. So the intention that goes into the designing process, especially if you're quite fluent in how to use those patterns, and the ritual and the ceremony and all of that kind of stuff is all gelled together, then you have the unique, in my opinion, method of influencing the person's bioenergetic field. So from the Maori point of view, the creation of the human being started as a single cell, and it was all the atua who gifted different parts of the body to create the first human being. The skin was the first thing that they actually created, from what I understand from Papa Joe Delamere's wānanga. And the way he talks about the skin is that it's not just something that keeps everything in place and protects you from, the viruses and all that kind of stuff from the external world, but it's also a messenger. It's a sensory messenger that has receptors that can sense things that are coming in from outside of you and convey that information or those messages to the internal organs of the body, or the brain, or the puman, or the three brains we say. And so the skin has this communication network going on. And so if you're going to do something to the skin, it affects the whole body. Especially if you're doing it with intention, and especially if you're doing it under ceremony and ritual, and through a purification process and all this kind of thing going on, then you have the ability to help people heal through traumas and the reasons why they're coming to get tattooed. Sometimes people come to get tattooed for things like losing babies, or losing loved ones, or dealing with incest. That's a common one, unfortunately. But the process that they go through, the actual ceremony of getting tattooed, has, in my experience, has really helped people to move past those, to lay those hurts down, to lay those traumas down, and just move on. My mentor, Mark Korpua, his wife is actually a psychiatrist, Maori psychiatrist, and since they got together 10 years ago or so, she noticed how this process was taking place. And so she started to delve into all of this, and she now they actually do this as a training methodology for artists. She started prescribing moko for some of her clients, her psychiatry clients, to help them process trauma and that kind of stuff, So and now they both are sort of headlining this movement of healing methodology, where they use moko, and not just moko but artists in general, but moko predominantly, to help people heal through their traumas. It's a fascinating subject, and one, you know, over my past, especially the past 15 years, have seen that that's, you know, in my experience, it really has helped people heal from stuff that they've gone through in the past.
Because it's a huge energetic exchange going on, when you've got, especially when there's ceremony and ritual involved, and everyone's there, and all the intention, everything behind that, being, you know, it's being programmed into that person as well. It's helping reprogram them.
Totally is.
Through the energetic frequencies that are happening.
Yeah, that's for real. I mean, and the energy that you bring as an artist. I mean, if you're in a bad state of mind, you know, for me, if I was in a bad state of mind and I had an important piece to do on somebody, and I knew that my energy was just not going to be right for the day, then I'd move the appointment. You know, just because I needed to get into that space. And so for us as a couple, my wife also tattoos. We have a home studio. I make a point of managing the energy of the studio. Make sure that the energy in the studio is always a good vibe going on in there. Always. Cleanse out the studio energetically, cleanse it out spiritually, cleanse it out physically. So that when people come in, and most people come into the studio and they go, man, this feels good. You know?
Every single person does.
And so that's because we manage it.
It's a sanctuary in there. It's when they come in that it's like they're coming home. You know, they feel really welcome there. You know, and it just feels really nice,
welcoming,
positive.
Like you say. And you know, the entrance wall in our studio, as you step in the door, and on the right hand side, there's a whole wall full of paintings of ancestors. You know? And that's done on purpose as well, because, you know, we want them to come into the space thinking, okay, this is like Arohinga, right? This is a liminal space, subliminal space. This is a space where it's not like a studio down in King's Cross where you're just going to go in and heavy metal playing and, you know, all sorts of crazy shit happening. You know, it's not that type of space. And sometimes people come in and don't acknowledge that space. They don't see it. They don't, you know, they don't recognize it. And it's just something that we are starting to realize is, hey, you know, you've just walked into this space. This is a ceremonial space. If you're not there at that space, then you probably should go find somewhere else that's more appropriate for you. And having a home studio, we're able to, you know, it's appointment only, so we don't get walk-ins or anything like that.
It's there's a responsibility with all of that, isn't there? And maintaining your own
mana.
Your own mana, your
integrity,
own well-being, your own
all of that.
You know, your own purity, even your own what you bring as a practitioner. And you're the one applying it. You're the instrument as well. Part of that whole process that's applying those lines in there. There also needs to be clean.
Make sure you're in a good state.
In a good state.
You're vibing. This is why I sing so much while I'm
I'm
tattooing, because it just makes me feel real good. But that's a real thing for me. You know, making sure that people feel at home. They feel looked after, they feel safe. They feel safe in that environment. That's an important thing. And like you say, they just feel at home. That's an important thing for us. Manaki tanga, which is, you know, an encouraging space, basically. You know, you're looking after people, making sure that they're looked after and protected and safe through all of these little tools that we have in our bags, you know, in our kete.
It's quite amazing when I've been there and you've been with any client that comes in, but in particular the mokokaua and the mataora that people are receiving, when it's really noticeable the difference between them, but beforehand and afterwards. And once the lines are laid in there and they get up and their whole literally the energy is
shifted.
is different. Yeah,
Yes.
it's like raised. It's
Yeah, that's so true, man. And like every time I do a facial, especially a male face, well, and female, I mean, but they're both as powerful as each other. Man, these guys are, they're floating around on a cloud for the next year, easy. They're just buzzing really hard. And it's not because I'm the one doing it. It's just because it's the ceremony. It's the ceremony that does the healing. It's not the person behind the machine. They're just kind of like he's just the vessel, really. And the room is full of ancestors while you're doing that type of stuff. Yeah. No shit.
Yeah. You can feel it. They're all coming in.
Man, I tell you.
How what's obviously it's really important, that connection to ancestors. Yeah. What's your thoughts with all of that, and the importance of that?
For one thing, me being aware that this work is an ancestral work, has been handed down from the ancestors themselves, and even though it was lost for a period through the process of colonization, trade of heads, head for a gun back in those days, it's something that has been revived, and even though we almost lost it, you can just feel it, man. When you're doing that, especially the facial stuff, you just know that there's a bunch of people standing around you, giving their support to the process. Yeah. My ancestors and the person getting done, their ancestors, and we have a lot of seers, matakite, amongst our people. And I'll tell you, man, some of the stories that come through from them, they confirm each other. They confirm the stories, one person to the next, even if they might not be at the same period of the day, might come in different periods. I tell you, it's just one of those things that the ancestral connection is. For me, it's the ancestors that do the work. I mean, I might design the pattern and do the ink. But they're the ones that are actually doing the healing processes on the clients. Yeah. I'm just the one putting the ink in the skin, really. Yeah.
Do you ever feel guided in that kind of way when you were creating it, or when you were laying the lines in there, that there's whether it's from their ancestors or your own sort of, or both of them? Yep. Coming into the picture, going, look, just sort of pushing this way or that way with the design. Yeah, things will just pop into your head, and then you'll mention it, and they'll go, "Yeah, man, that's the one." Yeah. So when it flows out like that, you just know that people are going, "Hey, what about this?" or "Hey, what about this?" And so that's opening up to that as well, being more sensitive to receiving that and knowing that that's what's going on. That isn't just a passing thought in your head or however it's being delivered to you. There's a skill or an awareness that you develop, knowing that that's what's going on, that you're receiving messages here, or that you're receiving guidance. Yes, you have to be open to that. You have to be aware that as a spiritual person, am I open to being guided by my ancestors? And if you're not, I mean, you're just going to shut it down. But if you're conscious about it and you want it, it comes quite freely. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know where I was going to go after that. I did have a point, but I lost it. We were talking the other day about initiation, and how men and women don't, in a lot of cultures, a lot of places around the world, mostly everywhere now, initiation from childhood into adulthood, or boy into man, girl into woman, those things aren't really practiced like they were, and that's causing this immature psychology, immature thing happening with the adults of this world, and we can see that with the leadership of the world. They haven't moved out of boy energy yet. They haven't been initiated into man. Or if they have, it's kind of weird, freaky sort of
dark initiation stuff.
Yeah.
But it's something I think that it's just one of those things that are, like tattooing. The process of colonization has eradicated a lot of that, not just in Maori culture, but most indigenous cultures, a lot of indigenous cultures around the planet. The Western world doesn't really have that rite of passage going on anymore. Well, we kind of do. We call it a 21st birthday party.
Yeah.
And you get so drunk you can't remember the night. It was like, welcome to adulthood, mate.
Yeah. See, that's the classic example of initiation sort of not done the right way.
Not done the right way. Done unconsciously. Yeah. And so I've been reading these psychology books about the rite of passage. The archetype of initiation, and how, like you were saying, that how if we as humans don't go through this process of initiation, then the process of initiation too was usually done by the elders, right? It included some feat of endurance, pain, all sorts of things that you had to go through in order to say, okay, you did it, you hung in there, you pushed through this infantile sort of period of your life, and you endured what needed to be endured. So that now you're an adult. You made it through. But that wasn't just wasn't just that. It was the knowledge that was passed down at the same time from the elders to the next generation. That whole process has been lost for many of us. And I didn't go through that process.
No, neither.
None of my family have.
No, and although we've probably been through a whole lot of unhealthy versions of it and as we grew up and grew into men. Yeah. But continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So a lot of us who have gone through through heavy tattooing work, I think have kind of, in some ways, as self-initiated. We've gone through that part of endurance. We've gone through that having to grit and bear pain for sometimes days on end. And that in itself is a form, as a part of the initiation process. Like, we haven't had the knowledge handed down from the ancestors in that process, and unless like yourself and myself, we have actually gone out to seek that type of thing. Most people haven't. But in saying that, now back at home in Aotearoa, with the revival of the mataora and the kauai, I mean, it's going off in New Zealand right now. People are getting mataora and kauai left, right and centre. I remember a couple of years ago I went home to a mokopapa. I'm going to talk about mokopapa. And mokopapa is a gathering of the tribe. The people of the tribe will and have huis amongst themselves and figure out how many people are ready to go and get their chins done or their faces done. And so they'll create a gathering, and they call it a mokopapa. And it's a ceremonial gathering of the people where a whole bunch of people are coming together to get their faces tattooed. And this is really, really becoming now this new drive of initiation.
Wow,
the knowledge is coming down through from the artists and the elders that are there. So this process is starting to naturally starting to find its way back amongst us.
Wow,
it's powerful too, man. I tell you. You'll have to come to the next one. I tell you, bro, the vibe there is just amazing. You've got the whole, you've got hundreds of people sometimes, and they're not just sitting around watching. They've got guitars out and they're singing and they're huckers, and
so they're all contributing to the energy, and all contributing to the intention, and the uplifting, the
ceremony of it. Totally. It's an incredible feeling, and it's you walk away from those gatherings just on a high for days and days and days, and the people who are receiving the work, obviously, like I said, they're high for a good year. Easy. It's an incredible thing to be part of, and I'm so glad that it's making its way back.
Now that it's got a bit of a foothold, it's really taken off. It's such a powerful thing to be happening right now, and to be witnessing. That it's all falling back.
That's right. And the thing that, like we were talking about with the mataora story before, the main thing for me is that the moko, the mataora especially, the male facial tattoo, is about transformation. As we were saying with the story of Mataora, he was, he got into the state where he beat up his wife, and he had to go through this process of transformation in order to receive the art form and bring it back to the surface where he could, start teaching it to others, and that's how it happened. And so this whole process for us of Mataora is just that. For me, is the biggest part, is this process of transformation, making sure that if you're going to wear the markings of your ancestors, that you got to look at your integrity, you got to look at the way you live your life, you got to look at the things that you need to change in yourself, so that you are following this peaceful, harmony, loving way of life, so that you're not causing harm to people. You got to be a good person to wear the mark.
Well, you're the spokesperson for everyone that's come before you. You're the spearhead of everyone. You're the one now, right now, representing everyone that's come before you. So.
And in the Maori way of thinking, from our, through the wānanga that I've been a privilege to be a part of, with Papa Joe Delamere's wānanga. If you heal yourself, you heal not only your lineage that comes after you, but also it goes backwards. That energetic healing works backwards as well to your ancestors. So you're healing that whole cycle and breaking the cycles of. There's so much trauma amongst our people, sexual violence. Domestic violence, psychological violence is crazy. It's got really heavy there for a while. Suicide is, we have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. So there's a lot of trauma amongst our people, and this, to me, this art form of this revival of the Mataora and the Kauai is really starting to help people break those cycles.
Can you see it healing on a collective of the culture of the people?
It's happening already, and because there's people that come in at this the revival from different trajectories. So you've got those people who grew up around the marae with their language intact, country kohanga reo, all of that kind of stuff. Their tikanga, their knowledge of tikanga is spot on. And then you've got those from like my generation and your generation, my parents' generation, and others that have not been privileged enough to be born into those areas around the country, who have, not been raised around the marae and not been raised with the language. So you've got people coming at this thing from two trajectories. And it's causing this discussion, and especially happening online when you get, with social media now, something happens, out in the community, it gets plastered on social media, and all of a sudden you've got this debate going on. But it's quite a healthy thing, even though there's, a lot of cutthroat sort of messages and real nasty stuff going on. As this dialogue's going on around the kaupapa of moko, and who should be, who has the right to wear moko, for one thing, and. Do you have to speak the language to be able to receive a moko, which is a common thing? All of these issues are starting to get discussed. So collectively, it's having an impact as well.
It's it's so awesome to see that happening now, and something that other cultures should take notice of, and start looking back at their own history, and even if it's been lost, to try and find even like a smidgen of it. If there's a little wee bit left there, or a little wee hint of it, it can be growing again. It's just like you've just got to plant the seed and let it roll from there.
That is happening too. I mean, we've been rubbing shoulders with many Native American artists who are coming through, and they're in the same predicament as we were 20 years ago. Where they're just starting to take back the art form, and they have facial tattoos. A lot of cultures around the planet have facial tattoos, and they were all done for the same reasons. And so we're rubbing shoulders with these young artists coming through from Alaska and Native Americans from Canada, all around that area, and they're rubbing shoulders with them, and they're asking all these questions and seeing this process happening and unfolding in front of them. They're coming down to Aotearoa and hanging out at the gatherings with us, and so this process is really starting to, like you say, plant the seeds amongst them, and and they're running already. You know, hopefully
Yeah.
it's not going to take them 25 years to get to where we are now. It's
Yeah.
hopefully only going to take 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Because we've broken the ground, we've
Yeah.
done all the groundwork, you know.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, even though, you know, it's different cultures, but at the end of the day, not really. You know, the
Not really.
reasons, the reasons that we were getting
Yeah.
tattooed
Yeah.
back in the day were all for the same
Yeah.
reasons. And even though some of the understandings may have been lost, but listening to another people resurrecting theirs and hearing that will be helping them remember. You know, we're triggering remembering,
Totally.
whether it's, you know, through their ancestors or through their own DNA or cellular memory.
Yeah.
It'll come back. You know, it'll come
Yep.
come back
Yeah,
through
yeah.
that way.
That's for
It's
sure.
just triggering it.
Yeah. And again, from Papa Joe Dalamere's wānanga, all that knowledge is not lost, man. It's actually hidden away in the ether somewhere. You just got to learn how to unlock it. You know,
Accessing it, yeah.
it's in our own bodies because we're descended from the people who actually practice those art forms. So
Yeah.
all of that knowledge is actually in our genetics. You just got to know how to unlock it. And people like Joe Delamere, he knew how to unlock it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You know, you hear about the Akashic records and all this kind of stuff from other cultures. Well, that's exactly what the Maori wānanga talks about as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all there.
Yeah. What else have we got? What should we touch on here? How long have we been going for?
I don't know, maybe an hour. Done ancestral connections, shapes and patterns, carvings connected to the ancestors. Identification and belonging.
Yeah, identification and belonging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big one actually, identification and belonging, and Moko has really come to the forefront of that for the Maori world, especially. You know, I just tattooed a guy the other day, got a full sleeve, and he's a Maori, but he's pretty fair. He doesn't look like a Maori, you know. For a lot of people, they didn't know he was a Maori, and he would get quite. It would quite affect them, you know, not knowing people asking, bro, you're Pākehā? You know, it would affect them quite a lot.
Yeah.
And so he got a sleeve done, and he messaged me the other day, and he goes, bro, people are telling, you know, it's automatically saying, oh, kia ora, brother, kia ora, bro. They're not even questioning that he's a Maori.
Yeah.
And even though these type of things shouldn't really have an impact on us, it does have an impact on us in terms of our identity and the loss of our identity over the last 200 years. Moko has a way of just reconnecting people. I've always seen it as a bridge for people, especially in Australia. I've been coming to Australia and tattooing Māori people here in Australia for probably nearly 20 years. And until I moved over here 12 years ago. And you know, you got second, third generation Māori who were born here in Australia and have don't have a lot of connection to their culture, to their language, to their stories. And they have this longing, you know, desire to connect, and they don't know how, they don't know who to approach and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, they come and sit in the seat and you start talking to them about what Moko is, and you know, what type of patterns you can put on you, what type of information you can put on you. You need to look into your genealogy, because Moko is totally about genealogy and how you link into, you know, the wider community, not just the wider community amongst your whānau, your family, but the tribe in general, which has connections to every other tribe. So you just keep going and going and going, all the way back to the first human being it was ever created. And that's a powerful thing to start looking into, you know, knowing in this lifetime, you know, your genealogy and where your roots lie, and delving into those roots. You come out the other side of it an empowered person, knowing who you are is such a I mean, most of the planet doesn't really know who they are.
No, that's right. Yeah. So that loss of identity, or knowing who you are, or what, you know, how you're supposed to represent yourself, even, or know where you stand.
If you don't know who you are, you're lost.
Yeah.
You really are lost. And there's an old proverbial saying, he kāka noa hau I rui a mai rangi ātea. E kore au e ngaro. I'll never be lost because I'm a seed sown in the realms of rangi ātea. Stardust. You know, all of that goes back to quantum physics if you want to, but it just tells us as a Maori people that, you know, we're not a mistake.
Yeah.
You know, humanity is not a mistake.
Yeah.
You as an individual are not a mistake. You were totally meant to be.
Yeah.
Because your ancestors go back, you know, you're the tip of the spearhead.
Yeah.
Behind you is a myriad of ancestors. And until you start making those actual real connections to your genealogy, to the land where they, you know, the mountains and the rivers that sustain them, sustain their bodies, until you start making those physical connections to them, we remained in a lost state, in my opinion. And Moko, in my experience, has been a great bridge for many people who are in that state and have, you know, they come and get tattooed, and then next thing you know, a lot of them are moving home. They're starting to learn the language. They're starting to make those connections because they've been imprinted. Literally. It starts their journey of rediscovery.
Yeah. So back with the, you know, with the intention and you know, within ceremony and getting it done, and the karakia, the words and the blessings and the prayer that comes with that is really important as well. It's like part of the energetic imprint.
Yes. Totally. It's setting the space. So the ritualistic ceremonial space, I mean, everything in Maori society traditionally, everything you did was covered with ritual. Whether you were cutting your nails, going for a shit, everything you did was covered with ritual. And so when you want to speak to your subconscious, that's how you do it. You do it through the ceremonial space, through your ritual. So the psychology of the traditional Maori was probably a hell of a lot healthier than a lot of our people are today. But setting up the space through, you know, we even do things like pure, which is usually we do it at the ocean. If you haven't got access to an ocean, it could be a sacred mountain or a sacred river or a lake, where there would be this purification part of the ceremony. We'll go down there and actually sprinkle water over people or get people in the water, you know, like a baptism sort of a thing, I guess. We call it a pure, so we purify everybody's energetic fields. Bring in Maori. So Maori is life force, I guess, which Maori, bright white light, brilliant white light, which, you know, is sourced from the sun, comes through the sun, from source. So the source is the sun is the portal for that, I guess. Maori ora. So we have this sacred space, you know, this liminal space that is set up by, most of the times it's me, but sometimes they'll bring in their own tohunga to do all the karakia and handle all that kind of stuff. And man, I'll tell you, some of these guys can rattle on for hours, literally. Karakia for hours, not repeating a thing. I mean, I'm good for 10 minutes maybe. But that's such an important part of it, you know. Setting up the space spiritually, energetically, maintaining your mana as the tohunga, as the artist. You know, making, like we talked about before, making sure you're in a good state, making sure your energy is clean, making sure your thoughts are not, you know, wandering off on stupid things while you're doing the work, focusing, remaining focused on what you're doing, remain in that zone of ritual and ceremony, because it's the ceremony that does the healing. Such an important part of the Moko Papa stuff.
And so that makes me think of something else where back in the old days, where did the Ta Moko artists sit in the hierarchy or the level of status
they were considered a very especially the ones that excelled at their work, you know, who were really masterful at their work, man, they were considered rangatira. Some even worked their way out of slavery. because they were so good at tattooing. They became non-slaves. They became free men because they earned it. You know, and it was really, you know, chiefs, rangatira from all over the country. If you were a highly recognized tohunga Ta Moko, the chiefs will get you in from all over the place, so that, you know, fix you up with all sorts of taonga. The payment for their work was really probably the highest paid, you know, practitioner out of all the different practitioners in Maori society. So highly regarded. They had to deal with blood. They had to deal with touching people's heads, which was the most sacred part of the body. Dealing with blood was a tapu thing. So we had this whole tapu system going on. And because they were dealing with all that, and learning how to mitigate and protect and all that kind of stuff, it was a highly recognized practitioner art form. Yeah.
And I suppose, you know, there's quite a bit of knowledge keeping as well. Responsibility in that is
yes. Yeah, like we said before, a lot of our stories and all of that knowledge, the esoteric knowledge of the tribe, you know, obviously a lot of the tohunga Ta Moko had access to a lot of that knowledge and carried it. Not all of it, obviously, just the ones that are applicable to him, I guess. You know, but he probably rubbed shoulders with the gardeners and the you know, the healers and all of that type of stuff, the navigators, you know, all of those highly regarded statuses, positions amongst Māoridom.
A lot of people are probably wondering how it was done back then.
Cool. The tools. So the tools traditionally, most people have probably seen Samoan tattooing, you know, with the chisels and the tapping. Ours was exactly the same thing. Our tools were generally smaller though, because we were working with curves, really tight curves. So a lot of our tools were maybe 6 to 8 inches. And the actual chisel part of it, some of them were like single pronged, you know, like a needle. Other maybe 2 or 3, 4 or 4 teeth, sort of a thing. And the tools were made generally from things like the wing bone of an albatross, because it was so hard. It didn't break easily. Sometimes they made them from human bone. Nowadays they make them from pig's tusk. We still make them from albatross bone as well. Or I've been going to Hawaii and learning how to make tools from a Hawaiian master over there, Kione. And he's been making the tools from hippopotamus tusk and walrus tusk, I believe, because the same thing is really tough. But these tusks are enormous. So one tusk would last you, I don't know, easy 100 tools maybe. So they make these tools out of the bone, which was lashed to like a handle. So we had flat chisels, no serration, you know. And then we had the serrated chisels. For Maori, I'm talking about. The flat chisel was used to sever the skin. So some people think that we had like a V chisel that, you know, that actually carved like a wood V chisel with the skin comes away. That's not the case. It was just severed open like this. Severed open, and then they figured out how to make the dang thing heal like that. You know, because naturally the skin will heal in a keloid scar. Well, they were able to keep it healed like that. We're still trying to figure that part out, really. We haven't mastered that.
I was talking to Gordon Toy about that. He had a theory. I hope he doesn't mind me saying, but because he was him and a skin specialist.
I remember that.
We were talking about it, and the skin guy was talking about how the makeup of the skin and how it knits back together. And that if something gets cut, you know, it knits back together quite well. If it gets cut again, it starts not knitting back as well. If you cut it again, it doesn't. It's almost becoming
training it.
It's not going to knit back very well. And so the theory was that it was those lines were cut multiple times, like they would get cut, heal, cut it again, heal, cut it again, until it became a ridge in there.
There's actually a document by Te Rangi Kaheke, who's from Te Arawa, who was explaining the process of moko. I think it's in the grey documents. and he actually says that was a multiple cut process. And then the ink would be laid in later, sort of a thing. I don't know if there's too many people who have actually gone through their process. I know there was a couple of guys from down the South Island who had done a few heads. There's another guy in Taupo, but I haven't seen the work, and I haven't managed to get around them and talk to them about it.
So this is a technology, hey?
Yeah.
Like a lost technology that has to be rediscovered in a way.
And I would imagine they would have used poultices and even karakia. Karakia was something, the old tohungas of those days. I mean, they could make it rain.
Yeah.
They could call up a storm if they wanted to.
So the karakia would be keeping it from closing up. It would be keeping it apart, like just keep it separated.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't want it joining up.
Yes, that would be the intention behind the karakia. And also things like the type of ink. The inks was usually made from. There was a couple of methods. Kodi gum was one method. So an actual term for somebody who's tattooed. Another term for somebody who has a tattooed face is called matakori. Kodi face, basically.
Yeah.
Because they would burn the resin from a kodi tree, catch the soot, mix it with a shark oil or a human oil, and then make them into these little balls of ink, like a Play-Doh-y sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And they would store that, and sometimes that would last for generations. With a hand down. And then they would mix it up. They take what they need to mix up for their session for the day, and water it down, I guess, and use it from there. So that was mata. That was the Kodi method. The other method is a really strange one, and it's something that some people believe that it's not even a real thing, and I'm not sure, but. So they would gather this thing that they called an awheto or an aweto, which was kind of like a chrysalis. It was a little bug that would bury itself into the ground in the forest and crystallize itself under the ground and actually grow leaves on top of it like a plant. So it was a bit of a mixture of these things.
Yeah.
So they would go and collect these things, and then they would gather them up. And back in those days, we had a traditional dog. It was a white furry sort of dog called Kuri Maori. And they would starve these dogs. They would purify their systems. They would put them on a fasting for a couple of weeks or whatever it was, and just feed them water. So they would clean out their system, and then they would feed them these things. Wait for them to do their tutai, do a shit, and they'll collect the shit.
Yeah.
And go through the same process that dry it out, burn it, catch the soot, mix it with the oil. And a lot of us are left thinking, why the fuck would you do that? What's that about?
Yeah.
And
what's happening in that process that
but there was a similar process that went on in the Whare Wānanga, which was the esoteric knowledge schools, right? These traditional schools of knowledge where the students of the priesthood, the initiates, they would swallow a stone and pass it through their system, shit it out, and then clean it all off once it's all comes out. And that stone, every time they went into the schools where the traditional school was run only at night time. So you'd sit in the dark inside the wharenui, and at the altar in the wharenui, where the old sage would just rattle off this history and karakia, and you were expected to memorize it, But they would hold these stones in their mouth. And it's gone through this process of
going through them.
Of going through them. So
the student has
passed
it through, and now when he's learning, when he's picking up the lessons, he's holding that stone in his mouth.
Yeah, that's right. And that's got to do with tapu and noa, I believe. And I don't claim to understand how that really works, but what I do understand is that, and it's come to me from a couple of different sources. So one of my bros up in the north, his grandfather used to carry around a piece of dog shit an old dried up piece of dog shit in his handkerchief. He just keep it on him all the time. And the reason being is because it had gone through the system of a dog, or a human, for that matter, I guess. It had the ability to ward off black magic. So that's why he would carry it around. And there's another story down from the Taranaki region there was a tohunga down there. A tohunga, you know, some of them are really feared because they can kill you from a distance without even being there. Black magic, right?
Yeah.
And so there was one of these tohungas down there. I forget his name. And the people were trying to figure out, okay, how we're going to get rid of this guy. And so what the warriors, one of the warriors says, yeah, I'll do it. Just leave it to me. So he went and waited in his shit house, in his latrine, which is a pit full of shit, where the old fellow would go and do his shit every day. So he waited. He climbed down in the shit because of the same reason, because he knew that shit, makutu doesn't work around shit. That's got to do with this tapu and no thing that I don't fully understand yet. But so to me, I started placing, and this is just my theory. There's no written or anything like this. It's just my theory that the reason that they would, you know, go through this dog shit process was to protect the mind from makutu.
Right.
And that's just my own theory. I can't say that's a legit factual thing.
So because it's been through there, it's gone through there, using it to tattoo your face, you've now got a protection from okay.
That's just my theory.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned it to a few other people around, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense, but I can't say that's factual or not. But,
It does make sense if
why else would you do it?
yeah, that'd be a good reason.
Yeah, that'd be a good reason.
Yeah, cool.
And then they would go into a state of tapu. So the tohunga Ta Moko and the person who was receiving the moko, they would go into like a state of quarantine, and they would be in there for up to a month maybe. They weren't allowed to touch their food.
Is this before or after?
After. Because of the shedding of blood.
Right.
So they would go into a state of tapu, which is a state of tapu. Tapu just literally means a state of restriction, like a quarantine. Is a quarantine. That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
So they would sit in quarantine, and usually the work was done away from the main people. It was done out in the bush somewhere, there because of the spilling of blood.
Yeah.
It was a sacred thing. It was something. It was their way of dealing with virus and disease, I would imagine.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Kind of covered a lot there, eh?
Yeah, I think we've covered all that list.
Yeah, we might have to end that one there. I mean, we can have another talk again for another one.
Yeah,
you know, as we talk outside of this,
we'll
we come up with other ideas. Oh man, we should talk about that too.
Yeah.
So this one we should leave it there, and I think that's a lot for everyone to listen to at the moment. There's lots of cool information there.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll do another one
Keen.
soon.
Keen.
Yeah, awesome,
awesome,
man.
bro.
Thank you so much.
No,
It was
pleasure.
Amazing.
Awesome, brother. Sweet.